Good morning, folks. Welcome back to Storytime with Nick. Today's story is entitled The Leak. So, let's rewind to sometime in 2008. This is in my old house. This day we had a really bad storm. I forget what time of year it was, but it was a really bad rainstorm, a lot of lightning, a lot of thunder, and a lot of water. Not as wet as Hurricane Ida, but still, it was a pretty bad one. So during that time, something very weird happens. A little portion of the ceiling kind of changes color. What's going on up there? And then a couple hours later, the floor is wet. And I actually almost slipped on that. Luckily, there was a chair right next to me where I was like, whoa. So my mother's like, what happened? Did you trip? And I'm like, almost. I don't know what just happened. The floor is wet. And her face is immediately like, the floor is wet? So she turns back to that spot on the ceiling, and there's droplets coming out of it. And she's like, oh, fuck. A leak. So she immediately goes to grab some bowls and some towels, and she throws them right under where the leak is to dry off the floor, which there was a bunch of droplets that had already fallen, and to catch whatever water was going to come. Now, by this point, the storm had started subsiding, so we weren't too worried because it looked like this leak was going to die down. But then came the question of, man, we got to fix this shit now? Come on. Truth be told, we figured it was going to be a one-time thing. Like, oh, maybe just too much water for the house to handle. Or something along those lines. But the next rainstorm that we got, the next thunderstorm, I'm not talking about like a light mist or sprinkles or one of those AccuWeather days where you're supposed to get 10 feet of rain, but you end up getting like 100 degrees out, pure sun. Yeah. The next time it rained decently, the leak came back. So the ceiling started to get a little more eaten at every time that water came through. And there were weirdly bad rainstorms on and off for quite a while that ended up really aggravating that leak and making it really bad. And by the time those had subsided, we were like, okay, we gotta fix this shit because this isn't good. So my mother calls up Christopher. He had, if I hadn't mentioned, yeah, I believe I did mention in the story's renovations and shenanigans, he had done some work for us here and there. I forgot to mention, he had also repaired this leak that we had. But this was his first time on it. So he decided to fix the ceiling. He cut out the little bit. He looked to see what was causing it. He couldn't really find an issue. So he seals it back up, puts some new paint, calls it good, and it looks like that's the end of the story. But it's not. For many years, that leak stayed there. Every time we had a bad rainstorm. Well, most rainstorms. Sometimes it would come, sometimes it wouldn't. But we made sure to always leave a bowl out in that area just in case a rainstorm was coming through the area. And don't even get me started on Hurricane Sandy. We had to leave several bowls out and a couple towels stacked up. And let me tell you, those towels were pretty damp by the morning, and those bowls were pretty full. Not a very nice night. Even though Sandy was mainly a windstorm, I couldn't imagine what would have happened during Hurricane Ida. If that leak was still there during Hurricane Ida, or Hurricane Ida rolled around by then, oh boy, forget it. The whole house is flooding, even though we lived on the second floor. So, this was kind of an on and off thing, because for whatever reason, Christopher, he did so many exterior visual inspections on the roof in every square inch, and he couldn't find the root cause. It just eluded him. For whatever reason, it just eluded him. He looked everywhere. He looked under every shingle. He looked on every square inch that he could look at. Nothing. So it got to the point where, since he couldn't really identify the cause of the leak, he said, I'll stop charging you so much because this is genuinely unfair for you guys to have to deal with something that you don't understand what's causing it, and even I can't find the cause of it. So he decided to Because here's the thing. He's got to make his money, of course, and we would be willing to pay a pretty penny if that leak would just never come back. But once we realized that it was out of his control, that it wasn't coming back, and he realized it too, he's like, okay, I'll give you guys a break on your pricing if this is going to happen so often. And of course, in the winter, it wouldn't rain, so we would have some breaks from there. But in the summer season, the spring season, and the fall season, when it rained, of course. And sometimes we're better than others, sometimes not so much. Sometimes we had to repair that thing right away. Sometimes we would actually just go months where it would just be this weird hole in the ceiling that was water damaged. But so, we moved, okay? This was the time that we moved. Something very, very strange had happened in the time that we moved. On the right side of the house was a gutter. And on the left side of the house was also a gutter. But that gutter on the right side of the house, for whatever reason, it gave way and collapsed. It didn't collapse into my aunt's house or into our house. It just fell straight to the ground. And we called Christopher because he was still kind of the guy in charge of keeping up with that house. And we owned it still. So he was like, sure, I'll put up that gutter, because he also knew how to do that. And then finally, we had an answer to the leak. For whatever reason, somehow, some animal had chewed its way in there, and it was nesting. This was many generations of nesting that he had found in there. I don't know if it was he didn't know if it was a squirrel or a bird or something else nesting in there, but it was hidden behind the gutter. And it just so happened this was this weird, like, hang on the roof where you just could not see under it. You couldn't see what was there if the gutter was there. So when that gutter collapsed, he was finally able to find the site of the leak, and he was able to fix it for good. And when the next rainstorm rolled around, for the first time in, God, 6 years, the roof was dry. Not a drop. And that gutter was put back the right way because Christopher, he was a professional at what he did. He had been doing that shit for a long time. He had the gray hair to prove it. But so the leak was finally resolved, and we were able to move on with our lives. It was just an eluding thing that for many years we could not find the reason behind it. For whatever reason, some animal had just gotten into that little section, just out of view, just so barely out of view, that if you were able to move your head by just an inch, you would see it. But unfortunately, that was not the case, and just due to terrible fucking circumstance, we just could not find the cause, and neither could he. But at last we found it, and that thing was patched up the right way, and by the time the new owners came in, we knew that they didn't have to worry about that leak anymore. They didn't even have to know about the leak. Because when Chris finally found that leak, he made sure to do a full structural inspection on that area just to make sure that nothing else was wrong. And he declared it safe, and he signed off on it once everything was repaired right. And that was the end of the story. Finally, the leak was fixed, and we were free to move on with our lives right into our new house. So, that does it for this story on the leak. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.